We're going to dig into this secular talk video on Trump betraying the Palestinians. I found this so infuriating on so many different levels. The premise is totally off the mark. No one ever thought Trump was on the side of the Palestinians. So how would anyone characterize anything Trump does as a betrayal of the Palestinian people? Kyle fundamentally does not come to terms with several blatantly obvious things about the U.S. stance on Israel since the inception of Israel, and somehow sweeps everything Genocide Joe did away and pretends Trump somehow just surpassed Biden's heinous involvement in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I'm just as anti-Trump as the next guy, but treating what's going on in Palestine like a run-of-the-mill political football issue is just so pathetically lazy. I don't generally view Kyle as a bad actor or someone who purposely tries to mischaracterize facts, but his treatment of this topic is so disconnected from reality and flat out wrong that it's mind-boggling.
Under Biden, the Democrats on the issue of Israel and Gaza were an abysmal failure. I mean, there's no other way of saying it.
There is actually another way of saying it. Genocide Joe let Israel destroy Gaza, turning the whole place into rubble. He let them target doctors, journalists, innocent civilians. Genocide Joe allowed Israel to starve Palestinians in Gaza and deprive them of medical treatment. Genocide Joe allowed Israel to imprison innocent Palestinians. Both parties are okay with this. Both parties are equally supportive of Israel's apartheid regime and allow Israel to grossly mistreat Palestinians. Kyle goes into how bad Biden was on the issue, but then decides to go here.
But one of the things I was telling you guys all along is that it can always get worse. It can always get worse. And Trump had made clear in a number of different ways on the campaign trail and based on his first term in office, he was going to be worse on the issue. This isn't a controversial thing to say. If you actually give a shit about the details and you're willing to be intellectually honest,
if you actually give a shit about the details and you're willing to be intellectually honest. Not gonna lie, that part made me so fucking mad because in this video, Kyle does not remotely give a shit about the details. And the framing in this video was not remotely intellectually honest. Or perhaps to be more charitable, it wasn't lacking intellectual honesty, it was just lacking anything remotely intellectual. I'll get to the various things Kyle brought up to support his take, but spoiler alert, he doesn't bring up anything that proves Trump will actually be worse than Biden on this issue. That's not to say Trump won't end up being worse than Biden on this issue, but he doesn't actually bring up anything to support that at this point. He says things can always get worse. And while that's pretty much true in 99.9% of situations, it's completely callous and idiotic to say that Biden, the Democrats, and the Republicans approved genocide and won't even speak about Palestinians as actual people who deserve any human rights. But Trump is going to be much worse because it's theoretically possible for things to always get worse, and Trump's worse than Biden on this issue even though he didn't approve genocide. Trump's a bigger jerk than Biden, so he's definitely just much worse. Don't worry, I'll get to all of Kyle's weak-ass points to support his take. This whole thing reminds me of when Democrats started celebrating George W. Bush as a great guy in comparison to Trump. Forget about the fact that Bush killed over 1 million Iraqis, created the framework for a police state, and a laundry list of truly heinous things enacted under his leadership. Trump is just worse because he doesn't keep his prejudice and corruption under wraps and never really pretends to be the daddy of all Americans. Anyways, let's get into all the ways Trump is shockingly bad on this issue and worse than Biden.
So he's making good on his promise to try to deport pro-Palestine protesters. You know, the other thing is they want to cut off funding to any university that allows free speech and free protest, and those protests are anti-Israeli genocide.
Kyle brought this up as Trump's day one betrayal of the Palestinian people. Before this clip, he quoted an executive order Trump signed. Not sure why Kyle isn't mentioning the Israeli lobby has been pushing for this all along, and that prominent Democrats have supported the sentiments in this executive order, especially concerning suppressing and punishing people who want to protest in support of Palestinians. Hillary Clinton famously said she believes the protests were being controlled by foreign nationals. No one thought Trump was pro-Palestinian when he called Genocide Joe a Palestinian as a derogatory term. Kyle's entire framing of this issue is so off the mark because no one was under any illusions that Trump was going to be good on this issue. But you still can't say that he's already surpassed Genocide Joe.
So they're literally trying to snuff out free speech and freedom to protest a literal genocide armed and funded by the United States of America. That's what they're trying to do.
Yes, they, the Democrats and Republicans, have been trying to do that all along. Also, how is stopping the protests worse than initiating and supporting the genocide? I definitely support the right to protest, but that's a separate issue from Trump doing worse stuff directly to the Palestinians than Biden did.
Are you, Mr. President, that you can keep the ceasefire in Gaza and conclude the 3 phases of this deal?
I'm not confident. That's not our war, it's their war.
Asked if he's confident if he can keep the ceasefire in Gaza, he goes, I'm not confident. That's not our war, that's their war.
Is this the part where he did something worse than Biden? Would you prefer he just kept lying about the situation like Biden rather than admitting he's not confident about the ceasefire? Everyone from both parties has been saying all along, this is Israel's war, while they pretend the U.S. isn't vital to anything Israel does because Israel is completely dependent on the United States. So how is this any different?
But he said, I'm not confident that they're going to keep the ceasefire. Why did he say that? We know he gave assurances behind the scenes to Netanyahu and said, after phase 1 of the deal, when you get back hostages, you're able to go right back to the genocide. Just make up some bullshit about Hamas violated the deal and start bombing again. Nobody cares.
Whenever Kyle talks about the ceasefire and how Israel and the U.S. are not being honest about it, I wonder what rock he's been living under. Kyle, no one, especially the Palestinians, believed that Israel is sincere about the ceasefire. No one believed this would create perpetual peace and safety and dignity for the Palestinian people. Kyle acts like he uncovered some hidden truth on this. It's just so fucking embarrassing. It's like he has no understanding of anything. A ceasefire in any respect for any period of time is better than what preceded it. No one thought a finish line was going to be crossed. No one believed they reached safety. Supply vehicles went into Gaza. People in Gaza were celebrating some measure of things getting better, even if it was just temporarily. No one is naive about the situation. When Israel did their fake ceasefire with Lebanon, the Lebanese weren't celebrating because they thought the ceasefire was rock solid and Israel was going to be a legitimate, peaceful country. He really doesn't get this at all, yet he's so confident passing judgment on this from his ivory tower.
And here he is. It's beautiful property, right on the water, nice weather. A lot of amazing things can be done with it. This is insane.
It is insane, but is this the part that proves Trump is worse than Biden on this issue?
This was all such a fucking shameless ploy. This was all planned. Netanyahu went and met with Trump at Mar-a-Lago, and they planned all this out. Give Trump a PR victory like he got a ceasefire. This isn't a fucking ceasefire.
Kyle thinks he understands the motivations and realities of the so-called ceasefire better than the Palestinians who agreed to the deal. They don't trust Israel at all in any way, and they are much more clear on how Israel gets down and how America gets down than Kyle is. They still agreed to it because any halt in the hostilities is worth it to them. Any food that comes in is worth it to them. Any supplies that come in is worth it to them. This is the deal they were pushing for much earlier, but Biden couldn't get Israel to agree to it for 1 minute. The thing Kyle isn't connecting to this is that Trump wants to reestablish formal relations between Israel, Saudi Arabia, and other Gulf states, and some measure of peace is needed for that. He also wanted to just step in and look like, hey, yo, I did something, which is why some believed Trump may be better than Biden on this issue, although no one thought for a second that Trump truly supported the Palestinians.
At the same time that Israel released 90 Palestinian hostages as part of the deal, what happened? They went to the West Bank and they snatched 64 new hostages.
Yes, Kyle, that's what Israel does in these situations. They've done stuff like that countless times before. The Palestinians are not surprised by this. Kyle thinks no one knows this is how Israel gets down. You know what else they did, Kyle? They told the family members of the Palestinians they were going to release not to celebrate when their family members came home and not to show any emotions. You should probably read up on what goes on over there because you're reacting to this whole thing like you're completely naive. Also, is this the part where Trump is worse on this issue yet than Biden?
At the same time, the settlers were burning shit down in the West Bank. No, it's going down, y'all. I told you, this isn't a game.
Palestinians, please listen to Kyle. This isn't a game. I know you guys thought it was a game, but it isn't a game. He told you before, but you didn't listen to him, so you shouldn't have agreed to this fake ceasefire because it wasn't going to be a permanent ceasefire. You should not have tried to get any rest within this horrific situation because it wasn't going to be real.
When Miriam Adelson gave Trump $100 million, it wasn't because she likes his thoughts on the marginal tax rate or his thoughts on abortion. No, there's a quid pro quo. The quid pro quo is you're going to let Israel annex either parts of the West Bank or the entire West Bank.
Don't get me wrong, that's terrible, that's bad, etc. But Biden literally okayed a genocide for over a year. And he did it for free. No $100 million was even required. Well, actually, he paid Israel to do it if you want to get technical about it because of all the aid, the gift, the free money, the free weapons. And considering Israel is already run by right-wing lunatics who decided to initiate Endgame, as well as the fact Israel has been steadily shrinking the land in the West Bank by taking it bit by bit. Is this the part that's worse than Genocide Joe yet? Kyle, please review some maps of what happened to Palestinian territories over the years. Kyle somehow disregards U.S. support of Israel and its horrific policies and wants to pretend Trump is making things worse because of a weak-ass ceasefire deal.
What she did want is the embassy moved to Jerusalem. What she did want is the Abraham Accords, which was a giant middle finger to the Palestinians, basically saying you're going to be occupied forever and shut the fuck up.
I wonder if Kyle knows that the Jerusalem Embassy Act of 1995 was passed 93-5 in the Senate and 374-37 in the House to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and set aside funds to relocate the U.S. Embassy in Israel to Jerusalem. I wonder if Kyle knows. Presidents have been signing 6-month waivers since then to delay the process, and that in 2017 the U.S. Senate passed a resolution 90-0 to reaffirm the 1995 Act and called on the President Trump, of course, to enact it, which Trump ended up doing after signing the waiver a couple times. Oh, and by the way, Kamala Harris voted for it too, and so did Bernie Sanders. So it's much bigger than just Trump, Kyle. As far as telling the Palestinians they'd be occupied forever, that's what the U.S. government has always done. It's not right. But you can't scapegoat everything onto Trump. I'd love to do that, but it just isn't true.
Trump lifts sanctions on extremist Israeli settlers.
That sounds bad, but in reality, do you think extremist Israeli settlers have been stopped from doing extreme shit this entire time? Biden's supposed sanctions on extremist Israeli settlers was a fucking joke, while assisting, funding, and supplying a genocide.
She says Israel has a biblical right to the entire West Bank.
He's talking about Trump's choice for UN Ambassador Elise Stefanik. You know who else thinks Israel has biblical rights to all the land over there? Bill Clinton. He said as much when he was campaigning for Kamala Harris in Michigan. I'm sure that helped her lose a few more votes over there. Anyhow, yeah, that's a rough pick for UN Ambassador, but considering Biden's UN representatives constantly vetoed every motion to help Palestinians, and former Secretary of State Blinken was as bad as they come, I'm not sure the added religious framing will effectively change anything.
They're going to annex the West Bank, bro.
Bro, they literally been encroaching on the West Bank and settling in the West Bank for decades, bro.
They're going to do to the West Bank what they're doing to Gaza. We already saw Genocide 1.0. How about Genocide 2.0? It's happening.
I hate to break it to you, Kyle, but like folks who do genocide kinda want to keep doing genocide. Like the same genocidal reasoning that prompted Gaza genocide is applicable to the West Bank. But even though they razed Gaza to the ground and killed tens of thousands of civilians, they barely grazed Hamas, so they couldn't get to the West Bank in full force yet. But they were always gonna go back there, you know?
The complete and utter collapse of international law and human rights and the UN. I mean, this is fucking mind-boggling.
You know what else is fucking mind-boggling? Everything you're describing happened under Biden, so like... But is this the part where Trump was worse than Biden yet? Did we get there yet?
We literally still live in the world where might makes right. We literally still live in that world.
I don't know if I want to laugh or cry at this point. Yeah, we literally have been living in that world for like a long time, bro. This past year of Genocide Joe was mind-blowing, brother. Might is right and stuff like that. We have bases all over the world and attack folks all the time, bro. Kill like 1 million people like it ain't nothing wrong. It's a wild world. I thought Kyle knew all this stuff. Also, how did Trump make this stuff all worse again? By the way, I'm not a Trump supporter. Like, not at all. But are we supposed to pretend Trump is behind the last 80 years of U.S. empire? I'm so confused now. Kyle goes on to talk about Israel dropping an investigation of IDF soldiers, or a soldier who committed crimes on Palestinian prisoners. That's the status quo in Israel, and it's horrible. But what does Trump specifically have to do with that? That's what they always do, and it's very bad, but they always do it, and the U.S. is always cool with it.
President Trump is expected to lift the Biden administration freeze on 2,000-pound bombs to Israel, bombs that they use to kill hundreds of civilians to get one Hamas member. This is them saying it, not even me.
Wait, you mean the same 2,000-pound bombs that Biden sent more than 10,000 of to Israel after they started their so-called war in Gaza, while continuing to send them a constant supply of all other weapons, including 500-pound bombs? Yeah, the 500-pound bombs are basically like firecrackers. Can't really do much with them. Trump is for Israel. Biden was for Israel. The U.S. government is for Israel. The Democrats are for Israel. The Republicans are for Israel. How did this get worse again? And by the way, I'm not saying things won't get worse at any point in time, but it's not because of Trump. It's because of Israel and how the U.S. government always allows them to do whatever they want. Thus far, Biden takes the crown for enabling Israel to levels we never saw before. Will Trump actually take the crown from Biden? I hope not. Only time will tell. Maybe he will do it. Who knows? In the meantime, Democrats have totally forfeited moral high ground on the issue of Palestine after the misadventures of Genocide Joe.